Welcome in. It is Big Ten Today on a Thursday. Great to have you with us. Dave Revson and Jake Butt getting set to call Michigan's matchups the next 2 weeks. Do you know anything about that program?
I've been reading articles about it. I know Jim Harbaugh. He's a big name, so we'll get to get him on the call when he returns to the sidelines. But yeah, I've been researching the program.
Okay, good, good. That's good to know, because otherwise, I could try to fill you in.
I've heard Ann Arbor's a great city.
Yeah, it is. It is a wonderful place. So, all right, well, you let me know if you need anything over these next 2 weeks. In the meantime, they, of course, have a game on the Big Ten Network coming up on Saturday, and let's catch you up on all of the games over the weekend in the Big Ten. You see the Wolverines will take on Bowling Green. There's one conference game, Penn State and Illinois. 7 other Big Ten teams will face Power 5 opponents. That includes 6 games against the ACC. So it's the ACC Big Ten Challenge football style. Michigan State is the only Big Ten team facing a non-ACC Power Conference team. They will host future Big Ten member Washington. So let's run through these Power Conference matchups first, and then we'll get to Michigan, Ohio State, some of the other games a little bit later in the show. Let's do the East ones now. That there's the one conference game. So you have East versus West here in Penn State and Illinois. Penn State, to me, has been everything that we thought they would be. And they've been really good, both sides of the ball, very solid start. It includes a win over a Power 5 team in West Virginia. Illinois, frankly, has not been who we thought they would be. They have really struggled on both lines of scrimmage. As you assess this game, what stands out about it and each of these teams 2 weeks in?
I just think about the opportunity for both teams, and this being week 3. You know, week 1 is your introduction to the world. Week 2, you make some minor adjustments. But week 3 is really your last chance to solidify who you say you want to be throughout the season. At that point, there's not too many drastic changes that occurred throughout the season. So when we look at Illinois, I specifically piggyback off of what you said of who I thought they would be, what I thought their strengths would be. Of course, with Brett Bielema, I thought the strengths would be in the trenches, particularly on the defensive side of the ball with Johnny Newton, who, in my opinion, is the best interior defensive lineman in college football. You got Keith Randolph to make up the totality of the law firm. That hasn't been the case. And they face good offenses in Toledo and Kansas, but they have struggled to stop the run. Kansas put up 262 yards on the ground. Toledo 186. You have to take away at least some element of an opposing offense. And they lost a lot of talent to the secondary, Illinois did. So the one thing you would have expected and liked to see by now is that defensive front stop the run and get some disruption in the pass rush to help out some of the new pieces in your secondary. Well, you better do it this week, because as good as the offenses as Toledo and Kansas have, Penn State's the best offense that they've seen this season, the most complete offense. They got those 2 great running backs. They got Drew Aller, who certainly doesn't look as young as he actually is and as inexperienced as he actually is. So it's a great test for Illinois to meet this challenge. But on the flip side for Penn State, even though they're favored in this game, you're going on the road to a conference opponent. I think they're actually underrated even as the number 7 team in the country right now. I think they're underrated with how good they've been. This is your chance for Penn State to go put on a dominant performance on the road against a quality opponent and a quality coach with Brett Bielema. Now you start talking about, hey, are they knocking on the door and potentially making bigger and bigger cases to crack the top 5 and get in further into that future playoff conversation?
I'm with you. I think Penn State is really good. I still think there's something there with Illinois. Like, I would be surprised if we don't see them make some sort of a run as this year goes on. I just feel like from our camp visit, from what we saw last year, it just feels like there's too much talent there. But it is astonishing, right? They've given up the 3rd most rushing yards per game in the Power 5 so far. And again, it's 2 games in, but
not just the conference.
Yeah,
the Power 5.
The entire Power 5.
Yeah.
No, it's pretty surprising.
The run game too. The run game,
right.
to have Altmaier be your leading rusher on the season is a bit shocking to me. And I think that's just, we know who Brett Bielema is by now. Those are the 2 things that dictate his team's success.
I will tell you, he believes in those running backs. Like, he believes in Josh McCray. He believes in Reggie Love. So we'll see whether or not they can get it going. But again, a really tough assignment this week against a very good Penn State team. We will be talking in a bit to Joel Klatt, who's going to be calling that game. So plenty more on that one still to come. Other East teams facing the Power 5. Michigan State had a tough assignment already. Like, we knew this was going to be a difficult game. We would have talked about it a week ago, taking on Washington. That's before you throw in everything that has happened to this program now in the last 4 days with Mel Tucker suspended. What do you make of this matchup here on the field? Like, how do the Spartans match up with Washington even before we got into all the stuff that's going on in terms of outside distractions?
I do want to say this, and I know D'Antonio isn't the head coach, but he's going to be on the sideline, and I don't know that he's probably involved in the full X's and O's of preparation throughout the week. But from my experience playing D'Antonio, I don't know if there's a better coach in college football that is as good as he is at leveraging outside disrespect. And I think a lot of people are just saying, well, this is over, right? It's Washington.
Do you feel like there might have been some of that in the Michigan State rivalry a little bit during his time?
Of course. And I give them credit. I seriously do, because I knew when we play them, it was going to be a fist fight,
right?
Because he was good at leveraging that. And for every reason you just said, and for how successful Washington's been to start the year, I don't think anyone is giving Michigan State a realistic chance. Well, D'Antonio, this is what you do. Get the team ready. Specifically, when you look on the field, Dave, there's a few areas that I want to point out. When you're playing a quarterback in an offense like Washington and Michael Penix Jr., Michigan State's defense has to generate pressure organically, only rushing 4. If you have to send too many blitzes, Penix is going to pick you apart. So I'm looking at Jacoby Windman, Simeon Burrow. On the flip side, as good as Noah Kim has looked, you don't want to get in a shootout. You don't want it to be Kim versus Penix this week. You need your running back, Nathan Carter, to continue the success. Back-to-back 100-yard games to start the season. So it's about generating pass rush, and then it's about running the ball. And the new clock rule this offseason, so much was made about it. I think we now have seen a body of work of how that can affect games like this. You really limit the possessions of an opponent in explosive offense when you're able to run the ball and control the clock. So it's on Michigan State at home, run the ball, control the clock. The best defense is keeping Washington's offense on the sideline, and then you can look up third quarter, fourth quarter, and you're right there with them. All of a sudden, the pressure goes on the Huskies.
It's interesting because we talked a lot about what was wrong with Michigan State a year ago, and I think a lot of it is exactly what you were getting at. They just didn't run the ball well. They just didn't have a great running back, and it seems like maybe they do now in Carter. Is he Kenneth Walker? I don't know that he is. No one's Kenneth Walker, right? But can you be really good? Can you be a leading the Big Ten in rushing kind of back? And I think that changes the equation. It keeps your defense off the field. And then to your point, I mean, they're tied for third in the nation in sacks. So if they can get at Penix a little bit, we'll see. Should be an interesting game.
When they win, when Michigan State has been good, it has been running the ball and physical defense, getting at. I mean, when we'd play them, they were suffocating our offense. We had no chance because they were constantly in the backfield. That's the formula for success, specifically, and even more a bigger emphasis this week.
Yeah, should be a fascinating game, and we'll kind of see where Michigan State is. I mean, this is going to be a great gauge of just how improved that defense is, because at least on paper it looks like it's better. Maryland is facing an old ACC rival in Virginia. The Cavaliers, frankly, have gotten off to a really bad start. They're 0-2. They lost at home to James Madison last week. Maryland did not start well against Charlotte. They picked it up after that. This is a game that it feels like on paper Maryland should win. What do you need to see from them after kind of an uneven performance a week ago?
Yeah. On paper, they should win. And that's the storyline here, because Loxley talked about it and said, hey, we want to compete for conference championships. Okay, if that's the case, then when you should win a game, you need to win the game and do it in dominating fashion. You mentioned the start last week with Charlotte. Frankly, you can get away with it against Charlotte. You can go back and correct those mistakes after a win. You're not going to win a conference title. You're not going to beat Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, if you have so many self-inflicted wounds, particularly the turnovers, red zone scoring, and then just missed assignments on the defensive side of the ball, giving up big touchdowns. The good thing is those are in your control, right? You have a veteran quarterback, you have a good staple of running backs. Those are in your control. So this is a big week to start a little bit faster, to put it on tape against a Virginia team that got blown out by Tennessee and then lost to James Madison. For all those reasons, Maryland, this is your opportunity. Play a complete game. And then you're rolling into conference play against Michigan State. You have a chance to start 3-0, 4-0, 5-0.
Really favorable schedule to start the year for Maryland. We talked about that when we were on the camp tour. Very legitimate chance to start, as you said, 5-0. And this is one of those games. Look, there's no team they've beaten more historically than Virginia. So we'll see whether or not they can add that one. That, of course, an old conference rivalry. We've got Rutgers and Virginia Tech, which, remember, was a conference rivalry, too. They were both in the Big East. This is a good measuring stick. I mean, Rutgers has been one of the better stories in the Big Ten so far, starting 2-0, but really doing it in dominating fashion. I mean, they won their first two games convincingly over Northwestern and Temple. We saw Virginia Tech a week ago. Did not play great against Purdue. The circumstances were very strange. And, of course, the Boilers had a lot to do with it. They played a really inspired game. That being said, I think this is a good measuring stick game, too, for Rutgers. What's going to take for them to come out on top?
I think you look at that tape and what Purdue did to win last week. I think it was 11 yards rushing they allowed, and then the running game got going last week for Purdue as well. Well, that's been the start here for Greg Schiano and Rutgers to start the season. The defense has been playing sound, solid, and the rushing game has complemented that as well. I don't know if it's fair to say it's a must-win, but listen, this is a game that you certainly can win. You probably should win. So with that in mind, I think it almost is a must-win. On your path to try to get to 6 wins, 6+ wins, and get to a bowl game, you saw Purdue win in the fashion that you're going to play this week. I do think it's a must-win.
I agree. And I think you can point at it then and really start making the case that, hey, we are making progress here. This is a team that's given Rutgers all kinds of trouble through the years. Again, Virginia Tech isn't quite where they were a couple decades ago, to say the least, but still, they've beaten Rutgers the last 12 times they have played. We'll see how that one goes down on Saturday. Interesting game for Indiana as we continue this theme of facing power conference teams. They're facing a very familiar foe, not familiar in Louisville. They haven't played them in many years. Familiar in Jeff Brom, right? They know everything that he is about because he was the coach at Purdue. He had his way, frankly, against Indiana when he was at Purdue, going 4-1. Now he's with Louisville. He already has this offense firing on all cylinders. I mean, they're scoring points left and right. What's the challenge here for IU as they try to show themselves as one of the more improved teams?
Oh, man, this is a big-time game, and it's going to be a good game, a good benchmark and data point to see, where Indiana's at to start the season. You think about this, Dave. What's the locker room like if you're 2-1, you just beat Jeff Brom in Louisville? Versus what's it like if you lose a close one and you're 1-2. I mean,
right.
There's a big difference as you project out throughout the season. But Indiana, specifically on the defensive side of the ball, Tom Allen has these guys ready to go. They have been playing hard. Aaron Casey, Andre Carter. It matters that much more this week. Jeff Brom, we know him to have explosive offense, but typically it's been through the air. To start the season, he has Louisville. Week 1, they had 227 yards on the ground, nearly 7 yards per carry. Yeah. Week 2, 344 yards on the ground, 8 yards per carry. If you're Indiana, you cannot allow that to happen. You have to shut down the run and force them to be one-dimensional. That's your best shot. And then for Tavion Jackson, you just got named the starter. There's not going to be 2 quarterbacks. It's your team now. Go play a clean game. You lean on your defense to keep this tight and then put up some points in a disciplined manner.
Yeah, I know they feel really good about Tavion Jackson, 3rd in school history and completion percentage in that game against Indiana State. Again, level of competition going to be far better. But it is fascinating to look at Jeff Brom and what he's got going here and just how well they're running the ball. To your point, top 3 in the nation in rushing offense. We didn't see a ton of that at Purdue, although last year they got a little better when they had a good back in Devin Mockabee. And then interestingly, his quarterback is Jack Plummer, who was his quarterback for a time at Purdue, transferred from there. Now he's back with him at Louisville. That is one of 5 games on the network on Saturday. We're going to kick off the day with Big Ten Tailgate live in Wisconsin. Then our triple header. Remember, btn.com/gamefinder for channel info. And then the final drive, wrapping everything up, highlights, analysis. It's all Saturday only on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. Our big stat, Minnesota has 7 sacks already. That is the 3rd most of the Big Ten. This after averaging the fewest sacks per game in the conference a year ago. What's interesting is they haven't done it with all kinds of exotic blitzes. They lead the nation in sack percentage when rushing just 4 this year, getting home on nearly 18% of those situations. And Jake, it is particularly interesting as we continue our Big Ten versus Power 5 theme and now go to the schools in the West. It's particularly interesting given that they are facing one of the best quarterbacks in the country this week in Drake May. He's a guy who's being talked about at the very top of next year's NFL draft. This seems like a huge key to me. If they can disrupt the rhythm of North Carolina and Drake May, they've got a good chance here.
I agree, and it always comes back to that. You think when you're playing a good quarterback, it's on the secondary, right? They gotta shut down the receivers, and certainly Tyler Nubin's going to have his eyes in the backfield, and Drake May better be aware of where he is. But it always is about the pass rush. If you can put a quarterback on his back, particularly early in the game, and you're suffocating him and that pocket's collapsing, it's human nature that those thoughts get planted. I don't have as much time today. But I still go back, Dave, to the best defense against a good quarterback is your offense and your running game. And again, this week 3, the theme of the importance of it, week 1, you couldn't run the ball against Nebraska.
Right.
Certainly they did. They have a good defense. They've been playing hard. Eastern Michigan's defense, not the standard of Nebraska, but you found something. Nearly 300 yards, 296 on the day, I believe. 300's 300. And that freshman Darius Taylor, 30-plus carries, almost 200 yards on the ground himself. They just got back to that zone scheme. I broke down some tape of guys being hip-to-hip on double teams, being on the same page. You just give a running back a lane, and that's it goes back to the offensive line. It took a big step, but this is your challenge this week. This is a huge game as you think about the projection of the rest of the season, playing a good opponent, playing a Heisman-type quarterback, a first-round talent. You can beat them. We think about the lack of separation in the West. This is a big statement game and statement opportunity for Minnesota.
100% with you on this. I think it's a really important game for them. Not so much. If you lose the game, you lose to a top 20 team on the road. But if you win it, think about this. Minnesota has not beaten a top 20 team on the road since 2000.
Wow.
2000.
I was 5 years old.
You got to rub it in, don't you? 26 straight. I was significantly older than 5, but still, it's a long time ago. So, as PJ Fleck's done so many things, they haven't been done in a long time at Minnesota, but this would be one of those where you can point to it and say, "Hey, we are really different, and we're competing on a different plane." And we've started to see that, I think, in the last few years. This would be a huge boost for them. A tough assignment for Northwestern. They'll be down in that same area, just a few miles away, taking on number 21 Duke. Northwestern has to feel a lot better about themselves than they did a week ago, frankly. They got a win they desperately needed against UTEP. But this is a tall task here against a Duke team that is really good, as we saw in their opener against Clemson.
They are a different Duke team than the perception that we have of them in years past. And you got to give credit to their head coach, Mike Elko. He has these boys rolling. Defense has been extremely disruptive. You're holding Clemson to 7 points to start the season. And then here early in the season, they got 4 sacks, 12 tackle for losses, and they forced 5 turnovers. Maybe importantly, the more important stat of them all is being able to take the ball away. You're going to win a lot of ball games if you can continue that defensive trend. Now, Northwestern, I can't say the strength of their offense has been disciplined offensive line play and not allowing disruption, right, and consistently running the ball. But if you want to win this game, if you're Northwestern, you do have to take a stride with your run game and your protection and your offensive line. I thought last week that win, it wouldn't have surprised me if Northwestern struggled to get one win on the season, right? Because week 1, it looked like they were a team that spent the whole offseason where football was not the first, second, or third priority. Understandably so. But to go out there and win and compete like that, it says a lot about the character of the guys in the locker room, and it can do a lot from a belief standpoint going into a game like this.
Yeah, absolutely. They nearly beat Duke, if you'll recall, last year. They fumbled on the goal line going in for what could have potentially been the game-tying touchdown. It's a series Northwestern dominated for many years. Duke has really owned it here in recent years. They have won 4 in a row against the Cats. As for the other West versus Power 5 matchup, I love this one. Syracuse coming to Purdue. We've talked about, well, how much better is this Purdue defense based on what we saw last week as opposed to week one? We'll find out here. I mean, Syracuse can get up and down the field. They are really good offensively.
Yeah, so they've started the season. They're outscoring opponents 113-7.
Is that
granted? It's Colgate, right? Like, okay.
Yeah.
But you still put it on tape. And for Purdue, you mentioned which defense are they. I do put some emphasis into what they did last week because I felt week one there was a lot of missed assignments and little minor details, self-inflicted wounds. And one thing we know about Ryan Walters, he knows defense. He knows how to coach guys. And even though he's not calling plays, you can still sit in the meeting room and say, guys, you make a couple tweaks here and there, and we're 2-0 to start the season. You mentioned Syracuse's offense. This is a great test for them to go up against Syracuse, to host them at home. And again, their schedule, we talk about schedules throughout the year. It's challenging. Purdue has a challenging schedule ahead. So similar to what we said with Rutgers, when you have the chance to win a game, you have to win these games to build yourself some cushion, understanding the challenge ahead.
We talked about how difficult their schedule is, right? 11 of their 12 games against Power 5 opponents, and the one that wasn't was Fresno State, who was a Mountain West champion a year ago. Yeah. If they could come out of that 3-game non-conference slate at 2-1 with a new coach, you'd feel pretty good.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What needs to happen is the run game that showed up last weekend needs to show up again this weekend. It needs to show up again this weekend. Everything's easier when you could run the football.
They have lost 4 of their last 6 against the ACC, but of course they did get a win last week against Virginia Tech. So we'll see if they can make it 2 in a row against that conference. And while we're on the topic of Purdue, tonight don't miss a great volleyball doubleheader, the Boilermaker Challenge. Illinois takes on USC, then number 17 Purdue faces UCF. Women's volleyball powered by Unleaded 88 tonight, only on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. Each week, Joel Klatt puts out his top 10. He has 3 Big Ten teams in his top 6. Ohio State is 1 spot higher than where the AP has them, as is Penn State. And how about this? 5 of the top 8 are teams that will be in the Big Ten next season. And we are joined now by Joel Klatt, host of the Joel Klatt Show podcast, wherever you get your podcast, and of course the lead analyst for Fox Sports. Joel, I want to start with the Michigan Wolverines. Are 2-0 and have looked pretty dominant here. The level of competition hasn't been great, as we know. To what extent do you feel like you've been able to gauge Michigan?
Not very well. I anticipate and expect and have seen that they're a very good football team. That's why I still have them at number 2 in my top 10. This is a team that's deeper than they were a year ago. They're running the ball as effectively as they were a year ago. I think the difference that I see and why I think they might even be better is that I see the growth and development out of their quarterback, J.J. McCarthy. And again, it's tough because of the level of competition, to your point. But having said that, he's playing more efficient at the quarterback position. He's getting the ball down the field and to the playmakers. I feel like he's making quicker decisions. He's more accurate with the ball. And these are little nuanced things that make the entire team, and in particular the offense, better. So if you're asking me, do I think Michigan is answering any questions? I don't know if there were many questions to begin with, but one thing I do know is that this version of Michigan seems to be, at least through a couple of games, better than even last year's team.
JJ is remarkable. I mean, the numbers are staggering. 4th highest completion percentage through 2 games in Division I history. Obviously not going to be able to quite keep that up, but it has been something to watch. What about Ohio State? You still have them at number 5 in your rankings. They did drop a spot to number 6 in the national rankings this week. They have Notre Dame a week from now. What do they need to iron out here against Western Kentucky to get ready for the Irish?
Well, first thing is third down. We can talk about the quarterback, and I'm sure that we will. We can talk about maybe run game issues, and those are there. But the primary cause of what has been an underwhelming performance so far from Ohio State offensively is they can't stay on the field. They're 119th right now on third down. So, Rev, that has to improve. two areas where it's showing up. Their short yardage run game is not very good right now. And part of that is the offensive line, and part of that is the scheme. I don't believe in their scheme in the run game. They run far too many wide stretch zones, and because of that, they have a really hard time of getting the double team up to the linebacker. When they run between the tackles more downhill, they do a much better job of covering up color, I would call it, and getting to the linebacker. And in some of those short yardage situations, it's just quite frankly a free defender that comes through and makes the play. Then you can go to the quarterback. You know, if you can establish the run game, now you can go and you can say, okay, has Kyle McCord played great? No, he hasn't. He has a lot of room for improvement, but at least he's going to get all the reps. He's had 14 drives this year. Devin Brown has had 6. That's 6 opportunities that McCord did not have to go and develop against competition that you would assume that they would be anyways. Those are important snaps. That's why Ryan Day ends up going with Kyle McCord and selecting a starter, is because of reps and development. This is a big week as they get ready to face Western Kentucky because of the reps and development of the quarterback. I believe they'll be pedal down, pedal to the metal, and trying to get that offensive rhythm leading into next week against Notre Dame.
Facing a pretty good quarterback with the Irish. Sam Hartman's been phenomenal so far. You're calling Penn State and Illinois coming up here this weekend. Let's start with the Nittany Lions. Again, 2 weeks in, they did have a nice win against West Virginia, lesser competition this past week against Delaware. But what do you like about what you've seen as you study Penn State on tape?
A lot. I like a lot. I really think the question for me this year for Penn State was going to be, do I feel like they're on the level with Michigan and Ohio State in the East? I think that was probably your question with them as well, right?
Yes.
Would they get to that point? Through 2 games, albeit, yes, like they're good enough. They're improved at quarterback. Their run game is tremendous with Singleton and Allen. They've actually developed pretty good at wide receiver, which was a question mark coming in. I think that they've shown the speed and playmaking ability out on the edge. And then defensively, they're exactly what I anticipated, which is athletic, fast, aggressive, and they've got elite players at all 3 levels. So this is a team that's going to be really difficult to beat. For me, Rev, it's about styles. When I think of those 3 teams in the East, all of them were trying to target and beat Ohio State because Ohio State really owned that division for a number of years, late Meyer era into Ryan Day era. Michigan and Penn State have tried to do it very different ways. Penn State has tried to go match the speed and athleticism. Michigan said, we're going to go the opposite direction, and we're just going to get big and physical and pound them with the run game. Michigan is built to beat Ohio State. Penn State is built to try to compete with Ohio State, and they've done it in very different ways. That's why I think this year is so fascinating. 2 teams that are built similarly, and then this outlier that has won the conference in 2 straight years.
It's been pretty interesting to kind of scour through the conference schedules with the crossover games in the preseason and try to pick out, okay, which are the ones where some of those East teams might stumble. Yeah. And I've got to tell you that, like, coming out of our training camp tour, I thought this was one of the biggest crossover games on the schedule, Penn State and Illinois. Illinois looked really good when we were there. And I think if you would have talked to Jerry and Howard leaving camp, they would have thought, hey, this is probably a team that's got a great chance to win the West. They still might, but you wouldn't know it from these first couple of weeks here, Joel. I mean, neither line of scrimmage has looked good. They've gotten torched defensively. They've gone from the best defense in the country scoring-wise last year to the worst scoring defense in the Big Ten here early on. As you have watched them this week, what's happening here?
I remember that conversation with you, by the way. We were in Indianapolis at the Big Ten Media Days, and you guys had, I believe, just gone there, maybe, but I remember that sentiment about this game in particular. When I watch Illinois, I see a team that is trying to find itself after a bunch of leaders left, okay? And you can feel good about your team and what you have, but when you don't have the same players that made all the plays in the previous season, it's still an unknown. And they got into the season, and then it's like, Sydney's not walking through that door, and Weatherspoon's not walking through that door. And it's like, they had 3 draft picks out of the secondary in the top 66 picks. These were really good players. They lose their defensive coordinator, who all of us raved about, Ryan Walters, who's now the head coach at Purdue. When you're a program like Illinois, it's really tough to sustain the losses of great players and even really good coaches, okay? Because it's hard to recruit at the level that the elite programs recruit at, or have the budget, from a staff standpoint, even though Illinois has certainly done a great job from a budget standpoint of committing to football. Rev, I just believe that we underestimated the level at which those great players played last year, and we didn't take into account how tough it was going to be to replace them and some of the production in particular on the defensive side.
It'll be fascinating to see how they play this weekend, because you can forget about the first 2 weeks if you come out and beat Penn State and be a supercharged atmosphere.
And they'll be ready to go, and they'll be aggressive. And Brett will coach them up, because I still think he's a terrific coach.
Saturday, we kick off our triple header with Wisconsin against Georgia Southern and Indiana battling Louisville at Lucas Oil Stadium. Then number 25 Iowa hosts Western Michigan, and Rutgers faces Virginia Tech. And in primetime, second-ranked Michigan squaring off with Bowling Green. Coverage begins with Big Ten Tailgate Saturday, only on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. Go to btn.com/gamefinder for channel information in your area. Jake, you've got that primetime game with Corey Provis and Brooke Fletcher. What's your take on what we've seen from Michigan to this point in the season?
I think you've seen, first of all, is a maturity handling the situation with Harbaugh not being there on the sidelines. And I actually expected that with how veteran the team is. My biggest takeaway, though, and there's 2 ways to look at this, is you could say, man, it's frustrating that the run game hasn't looked as explosive as it did the majority of last season. Actually, when you look at Quorum's stats through 2 games this year, they are very on par through the first 2 games last year.
It's Edwards, right? I mean, Edwards is the difference.
He's about half as many yards this year. But again, both these guys are coming back from injuries, so I think it can play into their favor long term. They don't need them to have Heisman-type performances to win. So let them get healthier. Let them get more comfortable. You're introducing a new center on the O-line. Let those guys gel together. Here's where I think this is a good thing. JJ has all the potential in the world. His limiting factor was Michigan would blow out teams last year. He's pulled halfway through the third quarter, and they ran the ball most of the time. Well, teams are starting to take away the run game. They are overemphasizing loading the box. So then it's on a good offense and a good quarterback to respond to that. Good receivers, Roman Wilson stepping up. Cornelius Johnson has been a good complementary piece. Colston Loveland. But if a team's going to say we're going to take away the run, it's on your passing game to respond, and they've done that. I think their passing game sets the ceiling for this team. If they want to win a national title like they say they do, they need this passing game to come about. Defensively, just a quick note for you. Week 1, from a disruptive standpoint, 0 sacks and only 4 tackles for loss. That's not exactly disruptive by Michigan standards. Week 2, 5 sacks, 10 tackles for loss. Got to be more continue that trend of disruption this week on the defensive side of the ball.
A defense that is yet to allow a point in any of the first 3 quarters of their 2 games this season. The points have come fourth quarter against second, third.
It's a point of pride.
Team defense,
They want the goose egg.
Yeah, I would think so. You had Ohio State last week against Youngstown State. We don't want to overlook Western Kentucky, never overlook anyone, but Notre Dame's coming next week. Mm-hmm. So give me a sense of kind of what you think Ohio State needs to refine before that game, along the lines of what I was asking Joel after you saw them in person.
I think we should watch Kyle McCord this week, now being named the starter. And I thought that's what the tape said last week, too. I mean, he earned the right. He's clearly their best guy. How does he respond now, just being able to exhale a little bit, and Devin Brown is kind of off of his back? This is your team, McCord. You played good against Youngstown State, but you're going to have to continue that trend and continue that momentum going into Notre Dame. For me, I'm looking at the defensive side of the football. And It is a live by the sword, die by the sword type mentality with Jim Knowles, and Youngstown State was able to expose it just a little bit at times, as much as you would expect.
Right.
Western Kentucky has the nation's leading passer at quarterback from last year in Austin Reed, 4,700 yards through the air last year. You have to be assignment sound. Your secondary has to be ready to play. Your pass rush, then, JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer, you have to be able to rush the passer organically with 4 guys, because if you're consistently blitzing the way Knowles has done, you're putting a lot of pressure on the secondary. They need to play a complete complementary game defensively. And just one thing from an umbrella standpoint, I think if you're Ohio State, and if you're Ohio State fans, and if you're Ryan Day, and me, what I would like to see from them, someone needs to get mad. Someone needs to get mad, because there is a lot of people talking about, man, where's Ohio State going as a program right now? The standard has been sky high there in Columbus. It's a great thing, rightfully so. You need to put that on tape this year, because people are saying, how good can Ohio State be this year? This is your week for guys to fly around and put it on tape and say, no, stop all that conversation. We're still Ohio State Buckeyes. We're still competing with the best.
They're still ranked 6th in the country.
Sure.
I mean, I don't want to set off any alarm bells here. I understand what you're saying, right? That there are people who are saying, hey, maybe there are some cracks here.
No alarm bells.
Right.
No alarm bells.
Right.
But we were never even talking about an alarm bell to begin with, Yeah,
this week's big. And again, if you're proving that your defense is better and you're not going to give up big plays, to your point, Western Kentucky, I mean, they're going to throw it all over the place, right? So,
This is a big week. How comfortable do you feel going into Notre Dame?
Right.
This is a big week.
Because that quarterback's awfully good.
Yes.
He is really, really good. Saturday, we are all Big Ten all morning long. In-depth previews of every matchup and tons of fun from Wisconsin. Big Ten Tailgate presented by Buffalo Wild Wings. Saturday, 10 a.m. Eastern, only on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. Badgers are trying to bounce back from a loss at Washington State. They get Georgia Southern, a team that, remember, went into Lincoln and beat Nebraska last season. What are you watching here from the Badgers as they try to get back on track?
Well, they have yet to start fast in either of their first 2 games. It has looked real shaky, and then they kind of come around. First, it starts with the defensive side of the ball, because we have been, for the past decade plus, we've talked about Wisconsin and compared them with the best of the best in the nation. Right now, they're 11th in total defense in the Big Ten, so not even in the nation. How do you improve that? Someone needs to step up. That's Fickle's specialty as well. Defense has to play a cleaner game. And speaking of clean, offensively, 5 turnovers through the first 2 games. It's not a good recipe,
haven't forced any.
Right? Exactly. That turnover margin is one of the biggest analytic points to say win success. So you got to clean it, but you know how you do that? You got to run the ball. I was shocked. Washington State isn't known for having an explosive road grading run defense, and they really struggled to run the ball last week. Get back to playing Wisconsin football. We can modernize it, but it's defense and successful run game.
This is going to be a good test of their defense. Remember, Clay Helton is the coach at Georgia Southern, former USC coach. We were talking about Western Kentucky, how prolific they can be offensively. You go back to the beginning of last year, Georgia Southern is 2nd behind Western Kentucky in terms of total offense per game from the group of 5 teams. So this is a high-powered attack. It'll be a good test of Wisconsin. How about Iowa? They're 2-0. They've been outgained in both games. They're the only team in the country that can make that claim. Undefeated and yet to outgain either one of their opponents. Now they get Western Michigan. Has not been a great team to this point. They got absolutely annihilated by Syracuse. What do you see when you look at Iowa and trying to get the offense going here?
Yeah, so they have yet to eclipse 200 yards through the air. And I'm not saying Iowa needs to throw for 500 yards through the air this week, but Syracuse put up 350 yards passing versus Western Michigan last week. You got to get above 200, right? You got to get to 250. You got to at least show some upper limit and potential. Not only that, Dave, they've been outscored in the second half of these first 2 games as well. So you need to play a complete 4-quarter football game. Because Phil Parker is one of the best coordinators in the game, but the defense has not looked as dominant as this year, to start this year, as it has in past years. early in the season.
It's a high bar, too.
And it's not
really good.
It's a very high bar, but that's
Right.
been a big part of their team's success.
No doubt, no doubt. We were talking about Wisconsin and Iowa there. I think when you talk about who might win the West, those are probably two of the teams most prominently discussed. You have a different team that you think is going to win it after watching the first two games. Tell us.
I'm looking at Minnesota, the Gophers. And if you just look at, you could talk about the schedule, you could talk about what's lying ahead, but I think if you look at the tape of who's played the best team football to start the year, I think it's Minnesota. And I give them big credit for finding the run game last week. That helps me, that helps my perception. I'm partly going with Minnesota because I think they have a really darn good chance to go on the road and beat a quality North Carolina team this weekend. You do that, you start 3-0. I think the league then becomes on notice. Look, you're 1-0 in the Big Ten West, too, already beating Nebraska, so you have that buffer. But I think this is the week that they can create some separation.
The challenge for me is the schedule, right? It's Michigan, Ohio State, Michigan State as their three crossovers. Oftentimes when we look at the West and try to sort out who you think is going to win it, I think who you play from the East is a huge part of that. They were not done any favors there.
It's a fair point. I think toe-to-toe right now, that's a good game against Michigan State, but a winnable game. And then the question is can you potentially steal one of the two, Ohio State, Michigan? Won't be easy, but...
Yeah, if you win one of those, you're in great shape. And again, this is the last year of the East and West. There are only two teams in the West who have never been to the Big Ten championship game. Illinois is one of them. Minnesota is the other. Nebraska, of course, won it back in the Leaders and Legends days and got to the champ game.